Now, as I mentioned before, in Syria, we've got good news from Syria. The last of the terrorist killers have been ejected from Homs. The last couple of hundred diehard jihadi, takfiri, Saudi, and Qatar-paid crazies are leaving Homs. And I have a special feeling for Homs because I visited Homs. I spent a day in Homs back in November of 2011. I was in the Zara neighborhood where people said that they were being shot at by snipers from the rooftops. They wanted the Syrian army. They wanted tanks. They wanted helicopters. They wanted Syrian army snipers on every roof to kill any terrorist who stuck his head up and tried to shoot. In particular, the terrorists like to shoot at mothers picking up their kids at school. That was one of their favorites. So that's all over, and that is a very big deal because that is the so-called starting point of this revolution. It's no revolution. It's a destabilization by the worst imperialist forces. So hats off to Homs and go Syrian Arab Army. Back in a minute. Another note on the liberation, finally, of all of the historical center of Homs, the complete ejection of the terrorist rebel forces, be they Saudi, be they Qatari, be they Emirati, whatever they are. They're all gone, and this is a huge defeat for this rebellion. It's almost a year since the fall of Qusair, the liberation of Qusair by the Syrian Arab Army and its Hezbollah allies. That was already the handwriting on the wall, and this has taken longer than one would want, but the direction of progress is unmistakable, and Homs is now going to go back to peace. Now, we want Aleppo to join Homs in the completely liberated category as soon as possible, and pretty soon we're going to have just about every city in Syria completely free of terrorist forces. Now, the various indications, Obama administration is shipping, they claim, limited numbers of anti-tank missiles and the Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. These are being given to the terrorist rebels, and they're trying to impress us with all the safeguards and biometric systems and GPS systems that they're using, U.S. CIA, trying to keep track of the Stinger missiles in particular. The first Israeli airliner or Turkish airliner that goes down, or any European, U.S., Japanese, any kind of airliner, any kind of civilian airliner that goes down under these circumstances, that's going to be the impeachment of Obama. And I'm sorry, he's asking for it. This is getting to be a terrible situation, right? This is an absolute folly. And I would strongly recommend to Obama, don't do this. That is self-destructive for you, Obama, since that's all you can understand, not just how many people it'll kill. This will make no military difference now. It's too late for that. And indeed, we have reports that quite a few of these terrorist killers have now been shipped into, you wouldn't believe it, Ukraine, and that this is a big deal. Right? Several hundred of them have arrived over there in Ukraine. So to a certain extent, some of the imperialist forces are giving up on Syria, and they're attempting to cut their losses in Syria and switch over to the Ukrainian front. Now, remember, you've got Madame Slaughter, of the Obama administration and the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. She says that the vulnerability of Princeton of Putin is to be attacked in Syria. In other words, if you want to hit Putin in a place where you can hit him, and he'll have a hard time fighting back, then the way to do that is in Syria. So that's Marie Louise Slaughter, I guess her name is, intensely preoccupied with the privileges of oligarchical women, right? That they've got to have it all. But in this case, she wants to have bombing of Syria. She was one of the people, along with Samantha Power. It was Madame Slaughter who convinced Obama to bomb Libya. So she's one of the furies of the U.S. State Department and the Obama regime. So that is Syria. Now, where is this stuff going, particularly Ukraine? I will stress this again. Very simple things that everybody knew, and I think they still do know, but this is now at the level of a college textbook, maybe even of a high school textbook, maybe a grade school textbook, right? This could be your first grade reader. There are three things you need to know about Russia. The first is, these are the so-called septs, concepts, precepts, but septs that you would need to know for your European history test. First thing is, Russia wants a warm water port. Russia wants an ice-free port. Murmansk, up there in the far north, that's not good enough because it doesn't always stay ice-free. And even in the era of global warming, I don't know what it looks like, but this is for the past several centuries anyway. It's been like this. A warm water port. And what are the warm water ports? Well, Sevastopol is a leading case of a warm water ice-free port. Odessa is another one. Odessa is, remember from Battleship Potemkin, it's to some extent a basing point for the Imperial Russian Navy, and this is big for commerce and so forth. So Russia wants a warm water port, and this has been going on for a long time. Secondly, Russia is a country that has been invaded by land several times, right? And it's not just Hitler, it's not even just Napoleon, but it goes back to an invasion in the very early 1600s by Poland, and it goes back to the Great Northern War at the beginning of the 1700s against Sweden. So there are lots of cases where Russia has been attacked over land. Therefore, Russia wants to have its own cordon sanitaire. It wants to have its own belt, its own glacis, as it's called, Glacis, a belt of states, countries, nations, that are going to be not necessarily completely controlled by Russia, but friendly to Russia. That's the point. Not outright hostile. Not hostile. So this was Stalin's demand at Yalta, Potsdam. He wants to have governments friendly to Russia in such places as Poland and Hungary, Romania, places like this, and the Baltic states. Of course, he absorbed because they were potentially not friendly. Finland was invited to observe neutrality. I'm not talking about Finland today. I'm talking about Finland of Kekkonen, Finland of the 50s and the 60s, when they really were neutral. They were not members of NATO at all. They were not members of the European Economic Community at that time. So that's the second one, right? They don't want hostile states in that belt of countries that share a border with them. That's all it is, right? Again, the United States insists on having friendly governments in neighboring states. Canada, Mexico have to be friendly. If they weren't friendly, you'd see something happen. But so far, at least recently, that problem has not arisen. Now, the first point, therefore, is warm water port. The second one is no hostile states on the Russian border. And the third one is this question that since the Second World War, the ideology of Russia, be it communist, be it whatever, is based on the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945. The Great Patriotic War and its sacrifices are the legitimacy of any Russian government. So therefore, Nazism of the Ukrainian type is going to be extremely offensive. And we'll go into this more when we come back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. You got to remember to follow everything on Tarpley.net. And this week, what do we have? This week, a very interesting radio broadcast. I hope you'll listen to this. That would be a good supplement to what we're talking about today with Jeff Rentz. And this was about the feudal imbecility of Eastern Europe in the 1600s, and that includes the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and the Polish Republic or Commonwealth, but that is a very big area, including modern Ukraine, in the west at least, right, the Lvov, Tarnopol area, and it compares the oligarchical imbecility that destroyed the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and the Polish Republic, compares that with the oligarchical imbecility that we see today in the U.S. government through things like filibusters and the paralysis of Congress, but also in the libertarian opposition, Cloven Bundy and his armed gangs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We've got another report from the Los Angeles Times that the white supremacist armed gangs are still manning checkpoints in the Bunkerville, Nevada area. Los Angeles Times, May 7th. And Cloven's daughter says people want them, and they're still fulfilling their task. Yeah, I'm sorry. Whether people want them or not, they are interfering with interstate commerce, and they have got to be rounded up, brushed aside and rounded up. I'm sorry, but we cannot have government by armed gang, because there's a word for that. It's called fascism, and we don't want it. We can see what that looks like in Ukraine, and God forbid it should come here. Now, the simple stuff on Russia, that every neocon should have to take a remedial course in this stuff, and you might as well send in the responsibility to protect humanitarian lunatics. So crackpots, knuckleheads, and lunatics of both of the major U.S. ruling class factions. Russia wants a warm water port. If you try to take Sevastopol and indeed Odessa, you're going to see it happen, away from Russia, then the response will be energetic and don't get in the way. There's no point. Warm water port, ice-free. The second point is the glacis. In other words, there's a great desire in Russia not to have neighboring states become hostile. They don't want Russophobic governments in Warsaw, in Bucharest, in Sofia, Bulgaria, in Helsinki, Finland, or in these Baltic states, right? These godforsaken little entities. They don't want Russophobic governments. And this, I think, is a reasonable demand. It is consonant with the needs of world peace. And then the third point is that the dominant ideology, the emotional center of gravity of Russia since 1941, 1945, is the ideology of the Great Patriotic War, Velikaya Otchestvenaya Vaina. And this Great Patriotic War is objectively one of the greatest events of recent human history. And I would point you, take a look at the Frank Capra movies, Why We Fight. The Why We Fight movies by Frank Capra give special treatment. There's one of them that talks about the Russian angle in all this. And here we have statements from General Marshall, at that point the head of all U.S. land forces in the world, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, or, chief of staff of the U.S. Army. We also have a statement by Frank Knox, Republican, who was the Secretary of the Navy. And they say the defense of the Soviet Union is the greatest military achievement in human history. That's number one. And secondly, that the United States will have an eternal debt, eternal gratitude through the Soviet people for defeating the Nazi forces. Well, eternal means eternal. And we would honor this today as well. So that is an objective fact of history. You can't get around it, right? That the overwhelming burden of World War II was borne by Russia, and the D-Day invasion of France, of course, is a great achievement in its own right. But when we look at the casualty figures, apart from any other consideration, just look at the casualties, you will see that things like the Battle of the Kursk salient, the defense of Moscow, and finally the battle for Berlin, these lead to casualties which are unimaginable in the Western front of World War II. So, hats off to Russia for this. And therefore, why insist on offending precisely this point by funding a bunch of Nazis in Kiev? What is the point? What's the gain? What's the upside of that, one might well ask. So I think we've heard Putin talking about Novorossiya. It's the coast of the Baltic. It's Crimea. And I think it's going to include places like Lugansk and Donetsk, the coal mining, and I think Krivoy Rog and the iron, the siderurgical elements of there's a certain amount of defense industry located there. It seems to me that these are likely to be when the smoke clears, whenever that is, months, maybe even a year or two from now, you will see that these things end up under the control of Russia, and we should want it. I've told you again and again, the strength of Russia, a strong Russia, is very much in the interest of the American people, because it tends to contain, compress, deter, dissuade the insanity, the inherently insane, lunatic impulses of the current U.S. ruling class, right? Be it the neocon, fascist, madman, warmonger type that we've seen and continue to see through people like Nuland and Kagan and so forth, and or the responsibility to protect humanitarian intervention types, the Samantha Powers, the people like this, right? Susan Rice. I guess she bridges both. She's the worst of both. But you get the idea that this is powerful in the Obama administration. Now, what is going on? We have to remember also the origin of this crisis is that the U.S. insisted on having a coup in Ukraine, right? The National Endowment for Democracy, as Madame Nuland Kagan has helpfully reminded us, the National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID and Freedom House and the rest of them, Albert Einstein Institute, whatever it is, they all in some way or other contributed, and it was an effort with a price tag of $5 billion to create this, not to create maybe, but to foster, to revivify, to strengthen, to mobilize this body of cancerous fascist opinion centering in Lvov and western Ukraine, the Bandera people. Why insist on this? What is the point? You got to drive the NATO limit right up to the Russian border. You want Ukraine to be part of NATO. I don't think Ukraine will ever be part of NATO. I think, as I said before, the Novorossiya will be repatriated. It will be ingathered, and what will be left will be a Western Ukrainian rump state. But that will have so many border disputes that nobody in Europe will allow it into NATO. They'll say this is a one-way ticket to World War III, because this will be the revanchist and neo-Nazi government that nobody will be able to touch with a 10-foot pole. Back in a minute.